A prison sentence affects more than just the offender. Incarceration can take an enormous emotional toll on the offender's friends and family. It's an uncertain time that comes with many questions. What can you expect? How will the loved ones be treated? Will she be safe? At the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee, the goal is simple. They want every single offender to experience a safe and secure incarceration. And that means freedom from sexual assault. In the next few minutes, they want to share with you some important information about the practices and procedures designed to prevent sexual violence. They want you to know how the policies and procedures meet federal standards, what the facility does to manage these issues from the intake process all the way through the loved one's incarceration. And they will offer you tips on how to recognize and report signs of sexual abuse or victimization. In prisons around the country, sexual harassment, misconduct, and assault can become unfortunate realities for some offenders. In response, the United States Department of Justice established the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA.
PREA introduces national standards to prevent incidents of sexual violence in prison. It was also created to provide information, resources, and recommendations to protect individuals from sexual abuse in prison and to detect and respond to sexual abuse situations. PREA lets the offenders and their loved ones know that everyone is entitled to a safe incarceration. Sexual assault should not be an expected outcome of incarceration. It's not inevitable, it's unacceptable.
The Minnesota Department of Corrections is one of many prison systems around the country that has implemented PREA practices. A primary component of PREA is a series of zero-tolerance sexual harassment and sexual abuse policies in U.S. prisons, jails, and community confinement settings. The Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee maintains a zero-tolerance policy on sexual abuse and harassment. What does that mean for the offenders? Zero tolerance forbids any sexual abuse, misconduct, or sexual harassment among offenders. Sexual activity among staff, volunteers, or contract personnel and offenders is also prohibited by PREA standards and state law. Violations are subject to administrative and criminal sanctions.
Zero tolerance covers verbal and nonverbal contact, such as innuendo or hints at relationship or sexual relationship building. The environment in a women's correctional facility is a delicate one. The balance can be easily upset when offenders express sexual or romantic feelings toward each other, whether consensual or not.
This zero-tolerance policy meets PREA's federal standards and is among many issues and expectations addressed with newly committed offenders during their orientation.
As part of today's new offender orientation, it is our job to inform you of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, also known as PREA. MCF-Shakopee has a zero tolerance towards sexual abuse and harassment in the correctional facility. Today's orientation will be to discuss the national standards and give you all the information to have a safe incarceration.
Within 24 hours of an offender's arrival, trained staff members conduct a thorough screening to assess the new offender's potential for vulnerability to sexual abuse. They also look for an offender's tendency to engage in sexually aggressive behavior. The first step is the completion of a sexual violence prevention checklist, beginning with a review of the offender's criminal history.
We want to know if this is her first incarceration and if she's ever been charged or convicted of a violent offense. We also want to know if she's ever been charged or convicted of a sexual offense or has a history of committing sexual abuse. This allows us to determine if the offender's history makes her a higher risk for repeating an act of sexual violence.
The next step on the checklist involves an offender's potential risk of sexual victimization.
We're looking for anything that may increase an offender's possibility for victimization while in prison. We're looking for things like mental, physical, or developmental disabilities. Does the offender's physical build put her at risk with other offenders? What is her sexual orientation or identification? Has the offender experienced sexual abuse in the past? Are there any indications that the offender is at a heightened need for additional supervision, safety precautions, or separation from other offenders during her incarceration? This is all done for her protection.
Information gathered from the Sexual Violence Prevention Checklist is then used to determine housing, bed assignments, work placements, or possibly referral for services. These include mental health services, special investigations, case management, or unit security. Offenders do not have to answer questions in the survey, and they cannot be disciplined if they choose not to answer. They can also change an answer or provide additional information at any time during their incarceration. Another important part of a new offender's orientation is ensuring that every offender knows her rights. During the intake training, a staff member reviews the offender's rights with her, and every offender indicates that she understands her rights and the prison's rules.
I understand that sexual misconduct is any sexual activity.
I understand that sexual harassment is unwelcome advances, requests for sexual favors, any sexual conduct that creates an offensive environment.
I understand that I cannot consent to sexual activity with anyone. If I do, it is sexual abuse.
I understand that I will be held accountable if I make false allegations of abuse.
I understand that I can report any type of sexual abuse, comments, threats, or disrespect that is related to sexual misconduct. I understand that I have the right.
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 I have the right to be free from sexual abuse.
After every offender has been assessed by staff and introduced to their rights, trained staff members carefully explain the steps offenders can take to avoid sexual abuse.
We want all of our offenders to take all the necessary steps to remain safe. We tell all of our offenders to carry themselves in a confident manner. Don't take gifts or favors from anyone. There usually are strings attached. Don't take an offer for protection. Find a staff member you can talk with about your concerns. Say no if someone asks you to do something sexual. Choose your friends wisely. Trust your gut. If you feel a situation could be dangerous, it probably is.
So what should an offender do if she has been victimized, or if she has knowledge of sexual misconduct?
Our main message to every offender is to simply tell someone. Any offender who believes she has been victimized is encouraged to report it to a staff member immediately. We've also established an anonymous telephone helpline. Offenders and family members can call the Department of Corrections Sexual Abuse Helpline at 651-603-6798. Silence won't get action, and we want to make sure that everyone has a safe and secure incarceration.
What happens when an offender reports sexual abuse? The Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee investigates all reported or alleged incidents of sexual abuse, and trained staff members follow a series of responsibilities in response. These include separation of involved offenders, providing safety, support, counseling, and health services to the victim, completing a first responder sexual abuse response checklist, and share it with the watch commander.
This training session is going to focus on the department's mission of safe, secure incarceration for offenders and how that ties into PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act. As you know, the department has a zero tolerance policy for anything PREA related.
In all cases, an offender's report of abuse is reviewed for any criminal violations. If the investigation reveals abuse has occurred, criminal charges may be filed. If the investigation reveals that an offender made a false allegation, the offender is subject to disciplinary action and possibly criminal charges as well. Staff at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee are trained to recognize the warning signs that indicate an offender may have been sexually victimized. If family or friends see these signs of possible victimization, they should contact the Facility Investigations Unit or the offender's case manager. Ask yourself, is she feeling isolated or physically withdrawing from situations and others? Does she appear increasingly depressed? Is she lashing out at others? Has she been refusing to shower? Is she displaying suicidal behavior or making statements about suicide? Is she injuring herself? Has she been refusing bed assignments or housing units? Notify the facility if you recognize any of these signs in your loved one. All of these can be signs of potential victimization and are worth reporting. All reports will be investigated. In Minnesota, 95% of all offenders will eventually be released back into the community. And at Shakopee, 75% of the population will be released in 2 years. The goal is to keep offenders from committing new crimes after release. That's why the Minnesota Department of Corrections does all it can to help offenders transition back into the community as productive citizens. That means providing them with a variety of opportunities for intellectual, emotional, and even spiritual growth while they are here. A variety of innovative and evidence-based programming is available. Part-time or full-time work through MinCore Industries or jobs with institution maintenance crews and in food service. Access to a variety of academic and vocational educational opportunities, including GED completion programs. A faith-based program funded and operated by Prison Fellowship through a partnership with the Corrections Department. Mental health and chemical dependency treatment services are also available. Incarceration is a challenging time for everyone, including you. They hope that you have a better understanding of how the proven strategies are meeting the federal standards of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and how effective supervision allows them to prevent and address issues of sexual abuse and harassment. At the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee, a safe and secure incarceration for your loved one is the primary goal. And it's her right.